Good evening together. Nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. My name is René, pardon. I'm software developer for more than 16 years already. And I think the last two meetups I figured out that I do Laravel already for more than 10 years. The last few years I started working more with event sourcing. But not only event sourcing. My main stack is PHP, Laravel, Vue.js, React, Next, DevOps, so Ansible, Docker, Python, Nuxt, GraphQL, all those kind of things. Pretty nice. And then there's event sourcing. There's CRUD, and there's the new stuff. You need to get your head around it. That's actually it. But it's nice to get a head around that. We have a short agenda. I try to speed up in the first slides so we can have a more talk afterwards. So I will talk about the basics of event sourcing, advantages of event sourcing, disadvantages, the Spatie Event Sourcing package, application flows, and then we have some discussion. Basics of event sourcing, what is it? The definition and how it works, it's a software design pattern where state changes are stored as sequence of events, enabling complete traceability and the ability to rebuild current state by replaying events. So you not simply put everything in a relational database and then that's it. You have a trace. So you know how you came to this position, what happened before. The difference from traditional CRUD applications, unlike CRUD, which directly updates the database, event sourcing records all state changes as immutable events, avoiding overrides and providing a historical record of all changes. So there's an exception, of course. You can change the immutable events, but you should not. Especially if you change your events, data types which are saved, you might want to change the past. I will come to that later. So think of it as your daily life. The alarm rings, you wake up, you turn off the alarm clock, you fall asleep again. You turn off the alarm clock again. You're falling out of the bed, you brush your teeth, and so on. And later you go sleeping. So of course you can save to the database you went sleeping, but what happened? How did you came there? With event sourcing you have a history how it happened. It's more natural than CRUD, and therefore you know what happened. If only I could travel back in time to fix the problem, but you can't. With classical applications, with event sourcing, you can. There's a time travel, so you can just replay some events for a specific date or date range to see, okay, what state was the application at that point. This way you can find and fix some problems, then just replay the whole thing after you fixed it. So debugging and traceability in event sourcing allows developers to replay events to trace issues and even reset an application to previous state for analysis using tools like Laravel Telescope, for example. And you have the flexibility and data protection. Event sourcing enables creating tailored projections of data by replaying specific events and subsets of those, which can be optimized for different application views or analytic requirements. Those are the main advantages. Also disadvantages. Of course, it has a learning curve, which is you need to get your head around it. You need to think in a different way. You need to think in events. how the things happened, like in a timeline. The implementation itself is a little bit more complex. You can see it like, did you ever work with a React application? Did you develop React apps? Did you also use state management? Redux, for example? You have a lot of boilerplate. And here you can have the same. Of course, you can reduce it as you want, your implementation style, but you can also separate the things as much as you want, which results in a more complex implementation. Of course, you have a higher storage requirement because you save not only the latest state, you save all the events until you reach the latest state. And the learning curve, of course, you just get your head around it. That's the most important. But I have a few examples later, which makes it easier to understand. Then there's event sourcing. Before we just use CRUD. So we need to set up our application, just create with Composer a new Laravel application, for example. And we have some specific namings, which are part of the pattern, like aggregate routes, projections, events, reactors. And you can use whatever frontend you want. It's just backend stuff. I prefer Jetstream and Inertia. Some use different stacks, which I not prefer so much. So my personal roadmap, if I start a new project with event sourcing, I start with aggregate routes, which is in domain-driven design, the domain. You can have, of course, multiple aggregate routes, and everything related to this aggregate route everything related to this aggregate route will be handled only by this aggregate route. So if you have, for example, a user aggregate route, you will not handle a shopping cart, for example. That will be a separate aggregate. Then I define the events. So I think about, okay, what can happen in which order, or what can happen at all. Then I create those events. For those events, we need projections, which are saving the data into read models, which we know as a Laravel Eloquent model with a database migration. We can have plenty of them. Then I implement the front end. Then I might gonna think of reactors, which are side effects. So, for example, if a user account gets created on an application, you mostly have a side effect by sending a welcome email, setting up initial settings, write something to the admin, hey, there's a new user. Those can be written as reactors. How does the application flow? We have a command. You don't need to, but it's preferable for CQRS. Then Spatie has a simple command bus, which handles the commands, which is, the command is similar to data transfer object, but it's immutable. The data transfer object can be mutable, and it's similar, just to get what I mean with that one later. Then the command bus sends this command to the aggregate route, which can make a decision based on the past events, if new events or which events will be triggered. This is part of the aggregate route. Then it will be stored in the event store. There can be different kind of event stores. A relational database is enough for the very beginning. If you have hundreds or thousands or even more events, you can also think about event store DB, which is optimized for this kind of transactions. Then when the data is saved in an event store, we reach the projectors, which write all the read models. They also trigger the reactors. And of course, at the end, we have our read model, which we can use in our API, for example, to display specific data only for endpoints. Like if you have a list view, you probably have just a subset of your data. And if you have a detailed view, you have more data you need. You can put that in different read models through the projection. So everything is read optimized and therefore fast. If you, then there is also something called the Saga pattern. Did you ever heard of that one? Okay. So, for example, in a microservice environment, you want to execute multiple aggregate routes. So multiple aggregate routes are involved in your transaction flow. And this is where Sagas came into play. With this one, you have a new pattern to combine with the Saga pattern, you can combine multiple step workflows across multiple aggregates. Let's get to the examples. I kept the examples pretty short, so we have an overview how they might look like. Of course, you can also use attributes. So the Spatie package also provides attributes. So a command, for example, gets handled by a specific aggregate. You can put it here or you use the configuration file. I just kept it clean and therefore I didn't put the attributes in here. So we have a simple command with two parameters, order ID and customer ID. Place order. And that's the difference between a command and the DTO. DTO is really just, okay, this is the order object with those fields. And a command is like an order. Do it. Place an order. And you get the order ID and the customer ID. Spatie provides a command bus implementation. Therefore, a command handler should not be necessary to be written like this, but you can do if you don't want to use the command bus. In general, you have the... Do I have my mouse? No. In general, we have the aggregate, and we retrieve everything related to the order ID, all the events which relate to it. Then we place a new order for the customer, and we persist it. That means it will get written to the event database, event store database. This is the usual flow, how you get new data written from a command through the aggregate till the event store. The aggregate itself triggers the event. So it receives the command, or in this case, I didn't put the command. You can, for example, also give the command here because I personally use it as a DTO to not repeat myself. So I just pass the command also to the aggregate. And then I can, for example, instead of just this record that new event, I could also make some checks based on the past. Is he even allowed to place an order? Did he pay his last invoice, for example? If not, no, he cannot. Then different events might be triggered. This is what Saga pattern can do. So you should not trigger new events which are not related to this root aggregate in this case. Spatie events are extending the should be stored. So it's storable events, and only those get written to the event store database. They also receive the same parameters, and those are actually the parameters which get saved. Sometimes you can also, wait, this is event. Let's go back. Yeah, here you see there is this UUID. Where does it come from? That's the root aggregate ID for all those events for this specific order. So all events related to this order have the same UUID, the same root UUID, and therefore you can figure out which events happened for this order. We don't pass it in the event because we retrieve it already before. So if you added an order, for example, in the interface, you have already a unique identifier, and with this one you can retrieve all the events to edit exactly this order. If you don't have one, you just create a new one, and it will be passed to the root aggregate. Then we have the projector, which gets triggered as soon as the events are emitted on the root aggregate. So a projector can, of course, listen to multiple events. You can group them, or you can create multiple projectors. Depends how big your application grows, how big your domains are. And this does nothing else than getting the event, in this case the order placed event, and it creates an order model in the database, just as we know it as an eloquent database model. In this case, the ID is just incremental ID. I personally prefer to use UUIDs because I don't like the fact that anyone can just guess the numbers. I don't know. I like UUIDs more. Then the reactors, same structure as the projectors. They can listen to one or multiple events, and in this case it has a side effect. If an order is placed, a mail will be sent to the customer with the order confirmation. So everything is clear, huh? Do you have questions?
I don't really get the basics about the storage. Is everything stored in the event store, or could it still be a standard relational database and the event store is something different?
The stored events are just in one table. If you start small, then they will all be stored in one database table, which of course can grow pretty much. But if it happens, then you can also migrate to the event store database, which is exactly for this kind of operations. And the projector gets triggered after that. And with that, you can write your own models. So you can create multiple projections. For example, like a list view and a detail view, you have different data. Of course, you can put everything in one model and then just fetch a subset. But if you create two, then everything is dedicated for the list view and the detail view.
Mm-hmm. But could I start really lightweight and just keep my relational database and just store events? And would that work? Or first I would need to get rid of some foreign key constraints and stuff? Or?
You can, of course, keep your relational database. I have a project right now, which is an existing project, and I just implemented event sourcing afterwards. Mm. So, okay, to be honest, there's not much about relations in that one. Not really. So if you have a relation and it doesn't return a relation, it returns a collection, then you know something is really off. But yeah, you can keep your relational database, of course.
Thanks.
I mean, you can also, with the projections, create your relations. You don't need to write in just, where's the reactor projector? You don't need to write just one model. Of course, in this projector, you can also write the relation. So for example, you have an order and you have the order items.
So, why? I mean, I know it's great. I like the pattern per se, but just to play devil's advocate, I can like simply store the changes in another Spatie package called activity log and see what changed there.
Fun fact, exactly today, I read something about that one in the Laravel Telegram group. If you need that package, you could also use event sourcing. Because then you have a cleaner structure, of course, because there you just write everything in one table, but multiple models, and you have everything in there. With event sourcing, you have the root aggregates, which just is dedicated to the corresponding events. Of course, also everything, the changed data is stored in the event store. With activity log, yeah, you can, if I remember correctly, you can save the whole model, but also partially, yeah, but
it's a lot.
I have a question regarding like data privacy and stuff. At work recently, I had to like go through our database and delete stuff. How does that work in event sourcing? For example, a customer wants to delete all their data. How does it work in event sourcing?
he should leave the EU. Yeah, to be honest, there is a possibility, of course, you can go over the past events and anonymize it, make it anonymous. That's a possibility. So you can change the past events, or you have that already in mind and you just save specific elements in the event store, so you don't use event sourcing for all data. I mean, if you're a banking system, yeah, then of course you will store bank details, but if you're not, you should not.
Yeah, basically use event sourcing for the parts of your application where it makes sense, and not for stuff that doesn't make sense.
Exactly. So you can use it for everything. You can also limit it, and you can also just implement it partially. So for the example, the application I have right now for a customer, it's just partial. And it also helps with the migration because the source code is evil, the database structure is evil. To be honest, everything is a little bit evil. But with event sourcing, I can abstract everything, can create my new field names exactly how they should be, and do it across the whole system. And afterwards, I have a single point of truth, my event store. And from there, I can start refactoring everything. So it also helps a lot if you have a legacy application and you want to get rid of that. Mostly you have the problem, you're stuck to it, or you start completely fresh. And most companies cannot afford to support two applications, a legacy and a new one. And therefore, this might be a possibility. No more questions?
So you mentioned the benefits being debugging, virtually time travel. How does that work and how does it relate to, let's say, migrations and code change?
So, bye. Time travel, of course, you need to implement a little bit by yourself. It's easy. Not so easy, it's easy, maybe. No, you need to implement a little bit, like some helper methods, and then you can just, for example, get a live dump where the error occurred, and then you replay all the events in that specific amount, in that specific time range. And I prepared it, but my source code is closed right now. It's possible.
And second question as a follow-up, you mentioned replay. Like, generally speaking, would you execute those events synchronously, asynchronously? Is that up to the application logic?
So let's say you're working for an employer, and your employer is evil because he wants a code change like twice a day. He wants those KPIs, okay? You know that feeling? So in a typical application, you implement it and then you get the data you have and try to make some KPIs out of it. But mostly with CRUD, you just have the latest state, so you need to wait a few days until you really are able to show some statistics. With event sourcing, I just created a new projector, a new read model. Then I replay the events, and everything will be written in the same chronology, in the same order. And then you have your data, your KPIs, your statistics from the data which already happened. So you can reuse your data from the event store. You don't need to start from scratch like with a CRUD application and wait a few days until you can show something. So you're also faster.
Okay, sounds promising. Thanks.
I think something just to add to that question or to the answer for the question. If you have like a history of events, you can create projections or usage of that data tomorrow that you don't know that you need it right now. That's pretty helpful.
That's exactly it. More questions?
I also have a question before I hand over the microphone. How many of you have already used event sourcing and not just heard of it? Okay, like a quarter or so. Thank you.
So do I get it right that you in an event this database, right? You store basically everything to be able to restore everything. So all the data necessary to.
You just save the changes. So, for example, if you create a new order, for example, of course you will save everything like what did you order, who ordered it, the quantity, what's the price of it, probably you want to save. If you change an order later on, you might gonna trigger different events. Like, for example, you removed an item of your order, you changed the quantity, then you just save this change.
Okay, so to replay, I always have to go chronologically, right? Like from the beginning to.
You don't need to go from the very beginning. That's where a new pattern comes into. It's called snapshots. So in between, you can also make some snapshots and replay from there. So for example, if you have statistics, you don't want statistics from the past 10 years. Doesn't make sense. So you can make snapshots every 5 years. And then only the events from that snapshot will be replayed.
And can I store, or does it make sense to store some of relationship in the events, like this model or?
You can save, for example, relational IDs.
But let's say I have to show these events in a user page or whatever.
Yeah, for example, if you see here, I create an order model and I save the customer ID, which is the relation to it. Of course, here I can also create the order items and save the order ID to the items.
And let's say you want to show it somewhere in the user interface, all your events. Then how you treat, like, you need also to show the, I don't know, the username and the event name, like you need to trigger all the relationship. So
why you want to show the events?
Yeah, let's because in our app, like we have a lot of events and we try to make it for user like also like the event log. They need it.
Okay,
So,
I would just create a projector
so
and
it will be a different.
just save those information you want to display. I would not go through all the events from all aggregates. I would just create a new projector and then display what you want to display.
Makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry again. I didn't get, or he mentioned it. What happens with the code base? If I deploy daily, do I then store commit hashes in the event store, or how do I revert back the data
The data. So
together with the code base? How does it match?
actually, I cannot answer this question because I develop a little bit different. I also don't make rollback migrations, for example. I only do forward, non-breaking. If something doesn't work, I create another commit fixing the last thing, but I never go back, because going back, also with database migrations, always has the problem of data loss. If I want, for example, to delete a specific column or table, then I do it explicitly.
But you say time traveling is possible with good event sourcing.
In this case, yeah, with the events. Yeah, this is something not related to the database migration or something like this, but you can say, okay, you set the state to a different event, and then from there everything starts running as normal.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I cannot really imagine.
I think your question is like, how do you find out which commit code was current at that time?
Yeah,
this event
because I want to
happened?
match. Yeah. If I,
Or just lining up git logs and timestamps,
Yeah.
I guess.
yeah,
It's not that
It's not,
relevant.
no,
it's not meant for that.
No. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, take an example. You have imagine a model of a user, an account, and you store the events like user created, user modified, and now this this account, at the beginning it's just first name, last name, email address, and now you have like 2 years later, your application develops further, and you say, okay, there is a new field or data to be stored to the account, which is now required. So you have events from before that change that don't have this information, and then of course your application must handle this case that you replay events that don't have this mandatory information present. That's something you just have to deal in the application.
There's
Yeah, but
four ways to do
it's-
that.
If you look at it from the not so technical perspective, your business relevant events don't change that often. So that makes it a bit easier.
Yeah, for partial event sourcing, I can imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
It's great. Yeah.
But that's actually a use case. So your events might evolve over time. So data is not required anymore, or new data is required. And in that case, I didn't do it. Where is the events? I didn't do it here, but in my applications I have a third parameter in this case. It's called version. So when it comes to replay the events, I can check for the version and see if that's the latest version. Perfect. If not, I can do multiple things. I can rewrite the history. That means I need to change all the past events in the event store, which makes it can take some time, depending how big your data store is. You can also do it on the fly. If you have a lot of changes in your events, this might not be the way you want to go, because then you need to check for all the versions before and upcast them.
Upcasted. That's a nice word. Yeah.
More questions? Okay. No more questions? No? Okay.